Hello there and welcome to the Card Grotto. Today I'm creating ocean backgrounds in 3 different ways using the new Hello Summer release from Spellbinders and Fun Stampers Journey. So to start off with, I'm going to be doing some ink smooshing. So I have a piece of Tim Holtz alcohol ink cardstock here. And I'm going to be adding on some liquid colour from Fun Stampers Journey. So the first colour I'm using here is the Cool Pool liquid colour. And I just added a ton of that onto my glass mat here. And I'm just adding some water onto that. And I'm going to take my piece of alcohol ink cardstock, and on the glossy side down, I'm just going to pounce that into the ink. And this just gives a really nice sort of splashy look. It works really nice, I think, for ocean backgrounds because you really do want that kind of texture of kind of splashes and things like that if you're going for that particular look. So I'm just using my heat tool there just to heat set that. And then I'm going to go in with the next colour here, and this is the Mermaid Splash liquid colour, and it is really very vibrant. In hindsight, I probably would have used a bit less of this colour just because it is so vibrant, and it is a bit obviously more on the green side because it's called Limeade, and so I did end up having to try and add some more blue into this to make it a bit more darker of an ocean. But I do really like that green, and I think it kind of mimics sort of seaweed and things like that as well, so I do think it works quite nicely for this background. So I'm adding in some more of that Cool Pool colour because like I said, I wanted it to be a bit more blue. This is more of sort of an aqua colour rather than a dark blue. But what happens when you heat set these colours onto this cardstock gives a really nice texture. It's really quite fun, and I did enjoy using these. But because, like I said, I wanted it to be a bit more blue, I'm adding in some more blue colour. I don't have another colour of those Fun Stampers Journeys liquid inks, so I'm using some Distress ink spray from Tim Holtz, and I'm using the Mermaid Lagoon colour here. I just sprayed that directly onto the piece, and then now I'm just pouncing it back onto my glass mat just to move that colour around. It gives a really nice organic sort of splashy look, which is what I was going for. And then I'm going to heat set that until it's completely dry. After it's dry, I decided to add a layer of Distress glaze over the top. This works really nicely with lots of different mediums, and it tends to bring out the colours a bit more. So I'm just using an ink blending tool here and a thin layer of that Distress glaze just to add that over the top. These inks are really quite vibrant as they are, but I think it did just add a bit extra sort of vibrancy onto this panel. But it's a bit difficult to see here on camera. I apologise for the lighting. So just adding that on, and then I'm going to buff the excess away with a dry cloth. And then I want to add some texture onto this piece, so I'm going to emboss a stencil onto it. So I'm using my Spellbinders Platinum 6 die cutting machine here, and I have the Bubble stencil, and I'm going to place that over the top. And the sandwich that I'm using here in the die cutting machine is the same one you would use if you were to emboss onto a die. So I'm using the main sort of platform there at the bottom, and then I have the embossing tan mat, my alcohol ink piece, sorry, my inked piece, and then I have the stencil over the top, and then I just add a piece of plain white scrap paper, and then I'm using that embossing plate as the top layer and just running that through the die cutting machine. This cardstock isn't that thick, so it doesn't give a massive impression, but I really like how it came out. You can definitely see those bubbles, and I think it just adds to the look of the ocean. I really quite like how that turned out. So I'm going to finish the card later and work on to my next background here. So this time I'm going to be using some glitter paste with Stencil. So first of all, I want to have a base layer for my card. So I have some Tim Holtz watercolour cardstock here, and I'm going to add a layer of Distress inks over the top for the colour of the sea. So at the top here I'm using peacock feathers. I am going to be adding quite a bit of sort of texture and things like that over the top, so I don't need a really smooth blend. I don't think you're really going to notice it in the end, but I do find that the Tim Holtz watercolour cardstock, they do blend really quite nicely, these Distress inks, since obviously they're kind of made to work together. So I'm just using Mermaid Lagoon here for my second colour, and then I'm going to go in with Blueprint Sketch at the bottom just to really darken that colour up at the bottom. And I really like this colour. It's kind of got a bit of a like a purple hue to it. I think it's really pretty. I am going to cut this piece down, so I'm not too concerned with being right at the bottom. So that's quite a bit of the colour there at the bottom, and then I'm just going sort of back and forth with those colours to blend them as best as I can. And here I've got the new Splash Zone stencil. I think this is really, really pretty. I'm really looking forward to using it again with lots of different ocean backgrounds. But I thought it would work really quite nicely for the card that I'm going to sort of make in the end with a mermaid's tail. And I thought it would kind of look like the mermaid's tail is kind of splashing out with the splashes. I thought it would be really nice. So I'm just sticking that stencil down with some tape, making sure that it doesn't move. And then I'm going to add some Nuvo glimmer paste over the top, and this is in the Moonstone colour, which is kind of a bit transparent, so you will still see some of the colour behind it. Because this is a liquid kind of medium that I'm adding on top of distress inks, and distress inks do react with water, I do find that it does pick up some of the colour, which is absolutely fine for me. I'm absolutely fine with that look, but I do find that I get some of the colour onto my palette knife and then consequently onto the glitter paste. So what I do is I add some glitter paste onto my mat or whatever I'm going to use as my surface, just so that I don't go back into the pot with a palette knife that's got some ink onto it. So I just do that, and then if I want to put the palette knife back into the jar, I just wipe that off. So just making sure that that's a really nice layer on top of that stencil, and then I can remove the tape, and then I can remove that stencil. Excuse me. And I think it just, like I said, gives a really nice look to it. I really love this glitter paste. It gives a really nice sparkle. Glitter paste does dry fairly quickly, so I am going to clean off my work surface, my palette knife and the stencil as well fairly quickly, just to make sure that that glitter paste doesn't dry onto it. And I'm going to set this piece aside to dry. I did end up leaving it overnight, but it does generally dry fairly quickly, this glitter paste, but you probably want to give it an hour or so. So for my last background, I'm going to be using some alcohol inks. So I have a piece of Tim Holtz alcohol ink, Yupo paper here, I do apologise, and I'm going to add a layer of the alcohol ink blending solution on first. Quite often with alcohol inks, I really like some really nice harsh lines, but for this piece I want to give a nice sort of ethereal look of the sea, so I want to dilute the ink slightly, and they do move better once you use that blending solution. So I've added quite a bit of that on the bottom, and then I've gone in with the patina colour, which is quite a sort of green toned aqua. I really quite like it. And then I'm using the pool shade and then also the aqua colour as well. And for the most part I just use the pool and the aqua, but I really like that patina sort of as an undertone underneath the other colours. So just adding dabs of that alcohol ink from the bottle onto that piece. I want most of the colour to be on the left hand side, moving down towards the right hand side, sort of more towards the bottom. I am going to cut this piece down quite a bit, but I do want there to still be some white space on this panel. So I'm just using that alcohol ink blending solution anywhere that I find that I've got a harsh line, especially on the outside edges. I want there to be sort of a fairly smooth transaction between the alcohol ink and the whiteness of the Yupo paper. And I'm just using that air spritzer tool just to move the colour around. I really quite like how that works. I can obviously pick up the paper as well and move it as I wanted to. And then if I've got rid of too much of the alcohol ink colour, I do go back in places, just here at the top there, just to add a bit more interest, I suppose, to the piece. And then once I've finished with that, I do set that aside to dry. Again, alcohol inks do dry fairly quickly, but I was finishing off the cards the next day, so it had a full sort of almost 24 hours to finish that off. So next I'm going to work on my images for my cards. So I'm using, this is the new Shark Attack stamp set from Fun Stampers Journey, and then this one here is the Make Waves stamp set. So I'm going to stamp both of those images out. They're going to be on two different cards, but I may as well stamp them at the same time. So I'm going to stamp them down onto some smooth white cardstock, just positioning them there in my mini MISTI, and then realised that these were foam stamps, and so you've got the extra dimension of those. So I'm taking out that foam piece there on my mini Misty, and then I can ink up these stamps with Memento Tuxedo Black ink. I am going to Copic colour them, so I want an ink that's going to work well with alcohol markers, so that's why I'm using that Memento Tuxedo Black ink. It doesn't smear or anything with using Copic markers. And I am going to double stamp these because that mouthpiece of the shark is sort of like a solid black. I want to make sure that I get a really nice impression. And then off screen I did colour them with Copic markers. I will have all of the colours listed over on my blog if you're interested, and I did fussy cut them out with scissors, but there are coordinating dies available if you wanted to use those. Next, I'm going to finish off this shark card first. So I want a sentiment for this, and I'm using the Nailed It sentiment from that Shark Attack stamp set. I thought this sentiment worked really well with that hammerhead shark. So I'm going to heat emboss this onto some black cardstock. So I've just prepped that black cardstock with an anti-static powder tool, and I'm just inking up that stamp with Versamark ink, and then I can apply some white embossing powder. I'm using some detail white embossing powder for this, just because although the font actually is quite thick, there isn't that much space in between the letters, so I'm using a detail embossing powder, like I said, and I'm just going to funnel the rest of that back into the jar, and then I can heat set that, and then I can cut that down into a sentiment strip. So to put the card together, I've taken a panel of white cardstock. This is slightly smaller than an A2 sized white card base, and I've cut an aperture out of that with a nestability circle die. I'm going to add my background piece onto the back of that, so I've added tons of foam tape, as you can see, onto the back of this panel, and then I'm going to add my background piece on top, or underneath I should say. Just sticking that down. And then I can add some adhesive onto the back of this piece. I'm just using a bit of tape runner here just to add a bit of extra adhesive onto that. And then I can stick that down onto an A2 sized white card base. And then I've got some foam tape here that I'm just adding onto the back of my sentiment. And I'm just going to stick that down onto my card. I decided to stick it down at an angle because I think this is kind of like a funny humorous type card. I thought it would look quite good at an angle. And then I'm going to add my shark here with some foam tape as well. I want to overhang that with the aperture, so I want the pieces that overhang onto the panel, I want them to be flush with the panel, so I'm just adding foam tape onto the inside piece where it is obviously lower. So just adding pieces of foam tape there, and then I'm going to add some tape runner onto the edges where it overhangs. And then I can just remove the backing of that foam tape, and then I can stick that down. And I like to use tweezers here just to help me out picking off the backing of the foam tape. And I do use tweezers quite a bit to get my placement where I'm sticking things down as well. I really like how that shark looks with the background. And then to finish off the card, I'm just adding some raindrops here from Lucy's Cards. I think the raindrops look really quite nice, kind of like bubbles to mimic the bubbles in the background. So just sticking them down with some multi-medium matte and using a jewel picker there just to get the placement. Like I said, I really like how that background turned out. I think it works really quite nice with the shark. I really like that sort of embossed background with the stencil. It's like I said, it's not majorly embossed, but I think it gives a really nice extra look to the card. So for my second card here, I've cut down that stenciled background with the glitter paste, and I'm just going to add that onto an A2 sized white card base, and I'm just using some tape runner again just to stick that down flat. And then I've cut a piece of white cardstock with the Sparkle Mermaid tail die, and this is really nice because it comes as two separate dies. So if you cut the two dies together, so like one inside of the other, you get this mermaid tail as a separate piece, but you could use those dies separately as well, and they create apertures onto your card, so you could have maybe like a shaker card or something like that, and I think that would work really nicely. But I just wanted the tail as a separate piece. And I have cut a piece of white cardstock down using a curved die just to mimic what sort of like a sea wave. I thought it would look quite nice having the mermaid's tail coming out from the sea, and then you've got all of those splashes in the background. So I'm using really tiny dabs of multi-medium matte here on the mermaid's tail, and I just added some tape runner there right at the bottom, because you're not going to see that because that wave piece is going to be on top of it, but it just gives a bit of extra stability to stick that down. I am sticking down obviously onto glitter paste, and so it does take a bit of time for that glue to dry, so I'm just using an acrylic block there just to hold that down while the glue dries. And then I've added some foam tape onto my sort of like wave piece here at the bottom, and I'm going to stick that down onto the bottom of my card. It's just removing the backings there with tweezers again, and then I can stick that down at the bottom. And then I have heat embossed the sentiment from the Make Waves stamp set, again onto some black cardstock like I did with that shark card. Just use the same method and the same embossing powder. Again, I can add some foam tape onto the back of that. I'm just using my T-square ruler here just to make sure that I add that sentiment down onto my card straight. Although there is already a lot of sparkle on this card from the glitter paste, I'm going to add some iridescent jewels here from Lucy's cards. I apologise for my head getting in the way a bit here and my fringe. I have no idea what my fringe was doing that day, but never mind. So I'm just adding little dabs of multi-medium matte here onto the card, and then adding the jewels on top and using the jewel picker there just to have them in place. I really like how this card came out. It's a little bit busier for my general cards that I usually make, but I really like that background, how the waves, or the wave at the bottom, looks like the mermaid's tail is coming up and making a big splash in the sea. I thought it was really pretty. So to finish off my last card here, I've cut my alcohol ink piece down and I've added that into the Mini Misty here, and I'm inking up the stamp here. This is one of the other sentiments from the Make Waves stamp set. I'm inking up really well with archival ink and stamping it directly onto the Yupo paper. You want an ink here that isn't going to smear when stamping on glossy cardstock, so you want something like StazOn or archival. I have to be honest, I don't always get a great impression when stamping onto Yupo paper. I don't think I got the best impression here, but I think it was okay, so I'm going to use that. So I've made sure that I've set that aside to dry for about half an hour. It does take quite some time to dry on Yupo paper, and then I'm going to add some adhesive onto the back of that, and I'm just using some tape runner here. I'm going to add it flat onto an A2 sized white card base, and then my piece is actually the same size as that, so it's going to be the whole of the card. So just sticking that down, making sure not to press onto where the sentiment is in case it is still a little bit wet. And then I have my mermaid here that I stamped and coloured earlier on. Just added some foam tape onto the back of her, and then I'm going to place her down onto my card. I think she works really nicely with that alcohol ink background. Like I said, it kind of looks like a sort of ethereal under the sea type look. I think it's very pretty. And to finish off this card, I'm using the Splash Zone sequins. These are really pretty. There's tons of different sequins in here. You've got loads of different colours like aquas and blues and purples and teals, really pretty. And there's also lots of different sizes and shapes. So you've got like seashells, you've got lots of kind of like standard sequins, you've got hexagons, I think, you've got beads. They'd be really nice in a shaker card if you wanted to do that mermaid's tail as a shaker card. I think these would work really pretty with that. But I'm just adding 3 here onto the background here. I didn't want to add too much onto this card. I really wanted that background and the mermaid to sort of be the centre of the focus, you know, the focus of the card, I suppose. But I think those sequins just finish it off nicely. And I quite like how the flow of the alcohol ink mimics the shape of the mermaid's tail as well. I think that worked out quite nicely. So that was my 3 cards finished for today. I know this has been a bit of a longer video, so I do appreciate you watching. Links to the products that I've used will be in the description bar on YouTube and also over on my blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.